Leadership. As I told you, I was trained as a linguist, classical languages. So a basic intuition of mine is always to look at a word and how it is used before I start looking at other things. So when I look at the word leadership, I see there a verb, and this is the word verb to lead. So how do we use this word, and what does it mean, and why all the fuss about it? Well, if we start to make a little sentence, we could take anyone. I have here Bart in my screen. Good morning, Bart. And say, Bart leads. This is a sentence, but it's not finished, because if you say Bart leads, you need something else. You need something which is what is led. For example, I don't know if you have a horse, but you could say Bart leads his horse. And then we can start to picture something, right? We have Bart there, we have a horse, maybe there's a rope tied to the horse, and this is the way in which Bart is leading the horse, but still something is missing. Because there needs to be some goal, right? Where to is Bart leading his horse? Well, maybe Bart is leading his horse to the stable. That's one of the uses of the word to lead. And I think it's one of the original words uses the word to lead. But then slightly differently. So we have Bart leading his horse to the stable. I think the word starts to mean already something a little bit different if we take, instead of a horse, we take his little brother. Tom leads his little brother to school. I switched to Tom now because Tom was the guy who was here in my preparation. Because to lead a horse is one thing, but to lead a human being is already a bit different. When we speak about leadership here today, I'm quite sure that you did not come here because you want to know how to lead a dog or a horse, but rather how you want to lead or a human being or human beings, or how this generally works. So this is an example of a sentence where we have one guy who is leading, Tom, or a girl, and we have one person who is being led, and we have one goal, and which could be a school or it could be something else. Then, of course, when let's say when you use the word leadership, this noun, then I think still we do not generally tend to think of a person leading one other person to a school, but probably rather think of sentences like Tom leads his company, right? Or Tom leads his division, and then what is the goal there? Also, we do not think generally of a goal in space. You don't think I'm going to a lecture on leadership because I want to learn how I can lead a group of people to I don't know what, to a football pitch or to a square in a town. Generally, you will have such sentences: Tom leads his company to fulfill the company mission. These kind of things. So it becomes a bit vaguer already. What do we mean when we say a person leads a group of persons to a goal which is not a goal in space, but which is rather a mission or a vision or, right, some common objective? Anyway, so that's what we're looking at. And I think this first linguistic exploration teaches us already that when we speak about leadership, we always speak about three ingredients, which is namely the one who leads, the one who is led, or the ones who are led, and then the goal towards which. The word lead, to lead, the word leadership itself, it demands, it requires all these three ingredients for it to be fulfilled, for it to mean what it means. That's why I suggest we look into each one of these ingredients separately before we go on. And that's why I start here with the PowerPoint, and here on the left of your screen, you'll see the one who is led. All right, so what can we say about the person who is being led? What kind of characteristic would we expect from this person? I have here a list. I will show them on the blackboard first, and then we can speak about it a little bit more. What is my goal? Person who is led should have this question. If you don't have this question, it's less likely that you want to be led. If you already know your goal, you just go for it. Then there's another question: how to get there? Maybe you know what your goal is. Maybe you know, I want to be I want to be a lawyer when I grow up, or I want to be the president of the European Commission when I grow up. So you know your goal, but you don't know how to get there. That could be a very good reason for you to desire someone to lead you, right? That you desire to be led. Where to find the strength needed? It's another very basic element, even of life, but also of our professional lives, of our careers, also of our studies. Maybe say, I want to score an A for my next exam, and that's my goal. And I also know how to get there because I have my book there, and I know all the material, and I know that I just need to spend 5 hours each day for the next 7 days, and then I will score an A on my exam. Thing just is that I do not find the strength within myself to spend these 5 hours with my book every day. Maybe I'm distracted because I have all kind of friends, or maybe I am a bit addicted to my telephone and I'm watching YouTube videos all day. That's why I do not find the strength to work on my exam. There can be thousands of reasons, but in this situation, also people will have a need for leadership, for someone or maybe several people to lead them, to help them, to find the strength, to get the strength to reach their goal. It's another thing. And then there is a fourth one, which I have here on the blackboard, which is also a bit fundamental. People are not always aware that they lack the strength to reach their goal. People are not always aware that they do not really know how to get where they want to get. Or sometimes it could even happen that people know that they lack something, that they need something, but they are a bit, let's say, you could say, they just don't want to be helped by other people. I want to do everything by myself, and I don't need help from somebody else. I will just get through it all by myself. So when we speak about leadership, a person who is led needs to have a certain consciousness that he needs help and a certain willingness to be helped. It's obvious, but it's good to mention it. It's good to say. Oh, see that the next one I have the list there already. Anyway, so here we have one of these three ingredients of leadership, namely the one who is led, and we say that he needs to be somehow involved in these three first questions. What is my goal? How do I get there? Where do I find the strength needed? And he needs to acknowledge that help is needed, leadership is needed for him to answer these questions to get where he wants to go. Then we go to the second ingredient, and you have the one who leads. I don't know, but I think generally when people go to a lecture or to a conference like this on leadership, I think generally people will think of themselves as the ones who would like to learn how to lead. I am not going to this conference because I want to be led. No, I want to learn how to lead other people. Well, here we have a few things which I think are, let's say, ingredients of this second general ingredient of leadership. Namely, what characteristic would I expect of the person who leads? You can see there is a certain parallelism between the one who is led and the one who leads. Because first, see there, I know more about the goal. Or I know the goal. I know where we want to get. If you speak with somebody and you see that this person, right, he doesn't have a clue where I want to go with my life. He is on a completely different wavelength. He is living on a different planet. And this person is not going to be your leader. He's not going to be a person who can help you. So if you want to be a leader of people, then you say it's almost a big thing or a tough thing to say or even to think about yourself. But you need to know something about the goal where these people you are leading want to get. If you don't know it, how are you going to lead them? And then the second thing is the same thing. And I know more about how to get there. Right? So we can think of a very practical example again. Maybe you are just a teacher of how to repair cars, right? So you're a car repairer, and now you are leading a group of 3 pupils who also need to learn this. Well, the goal is obviously that they know how to repair a car. You know that, but they also know that, but they don't know how to do it. You know it, so you can help them. You can be their leader. You should know more about it than another person. Then, pardon me for the typo there. I can give the strength needed. Well, I go back to the example which I gave you earlier of the student who is preparing for an exam and who knows how to get there. He knows what he should do to score a good grade on his exam. He just doesn't find the strength. Now you will see that a good leader is somebody who is able somehow, and it's a bit mysterious how it really works, somehow to give strength to other people to do what they ought to do what they want to do. And I mean, you can think of really millions of examples of this. Well, maybe not millions, but in any case, decades of examples. I was thinking of Barack Obama, for example. So Barack Obama, when he was a president, especially in his campaigns for presidency, it was very clear that he was able, even from a distance, right? Even when he was speaking before a crowd of maybe 10,000 people, he was able to inspire them really strength to go vote, strength to go, right, asking other people to vote. And that's an impressive thing. And that is something which, if you want to be a leader, if you want to think about leadership, it's good to think about this and how it works, right? I mean, it's a mysterious thing. It's not just a matter of good rhetoric. It's not just a matter of being with people. It's not just a matter of how you dress. It's leadership, right? This is what we're thinking about today. Then, fourth point. When we spoke about the one who is led, there on the left of your screen, we said that the person who wants to be led, right? He needs also this consciousness, this acknowledgement that he needs to be led, right? Helps. And with the leader, there's a similar thing there. I mean, somebody can have all these characteristics, all these great abilities to inspire people, and I don't know what, but if he just lacks the desire, if he just lacks the ambition to lead people, still it will not happen. So therefore, a leader needs to be someone who also wants to lead. And I mean, to lead is to help, to serve, right? To lead is to help another people reach the goal he wants to reach. And maybe this is obvious for some of you, maybe it's not obvious for all, but in any case, I think it's good, it should be included in our list here, because I mean, it is possible, and I think I also know examples of people who could be good leaders, but they are not, because they simply lack this ambition, this spark, this desire to be leaders. And then there's the fourth one, which is I inspire trust. I inspire confidence. Let's look at an example. Let's first look at a simple example, which is an example of leadership, but not yet a very, let's say, a very clear example, or let's say a very obvious example. It could be like a mathematics teacher. You can imagine a mathematics teacher. Probably all of you had a mathematics teacher once in your life. Now, to be a mathematics teacher, now maybe you need to inspire a little bit of confidence, a little bit of trust with your pupils, because if you do not at all, maybe they'll just run away from you. But you can do with really a minimum amount of trust, a minimum amount of confidence, because really, in the end of the day, just what you're doing is you have to explain them certain things of mathematics, and then if they're able to do these, right, calculations, then also they don't need you anymore. But even there, a bit of confidence is needed. But now imagine that really you want to lead people, a company, and you want them to lead them to a company mission. You want to get them along in your ideals, in your project, in your dreams, everything. It is obvious that it will only work. You will only be their leader if they accept you as a leader. So it is not enough for them to say, I need somebody who leads me, I need some help, but also there needs to be like this match, right? And again, here I would say, in my experience, partly my personal experience, although I do not have a lot of personal experience yet, I'm only 31 years old, but also the experience which I get from friends of mine, some of these friends from former ages, but also friends of mine, my father or other people in my life, they say that this is also a mysterious thing. So, I mean, it's good to be aware that if you want to be a leader, you need to inspire trust, but how it really works, I think you can read books about it and still have the impression or still have the sense that it's not something that you can, get your finger behind so easily, so clearly. But that it is something that is for sure, and that is also clear. So here we have the first two ingredients of leadership. Someone needs to be led, someone needs to lead. And here are a few things which counts for these two ingredients. And then we have the third, which is the goal towards which. Let's see if I can put it on the screen. There you go. Well, there you go. What is the goal? What is the goal towards which we or other people are going to lead the others or ourselves? It's a difficult question. I put here a list of a few things. Goal of life, happiness. Happiness is a word which many philosophers have used to, describe or at least coin, right, the goal of life. It's not very clear what it is. Maybe you have a lot of intuitions about it, but certainly among philosophers, there's never been, let's say, a very clear-cut agreement about what happiness is. But some intuition there is, right? I go for the second in the list, the company goal. Imagine you're in a company, right? So if you say the company goal is profit, the advantage is that it's more a clear-cut goal, right? So it's clear what it is you want to reach, what it is you are striving for together. At the same time, there's very obvious, very clear that it's maybe not the kind of goal that would inspire many people, or maybe it's not even the goal where of which you would say, if you think about it more, that it's really the right goal, right? I mean, not every goal, not all goals are created equal, you might say, right? So say, I'm going for profit. Probably many people will tell you, well, I mean, do as you like. You're a free man, free woman, but I'm not sure if you will be happy when you reach your goal. Social responsibility be another option. Yeah, it's a beautiful ideal. I guess you have thought about it. I guess you've spoken about it, maybe even in your studies. Social responsibility could be ecological responsibility. It's also an important and a great theme nowadays. If you are in a company, or even if you are working for the government, then I think part of the goal towards which you want to lead yourself, your company, the people, is certain sense of ecological responsibility. We want to preserve the planet well for future generations. What is the goal of a country? Security, safety, employment, public health. There you go. And then I have there fourth item on the list, which is unique for all, question mark. And I could speak for many hours about this list, about the goal towards which, because I am a philosopher, I am a philosophy teacher, and in philosophy, you always think about these most fundamental questions, right? I mean, where do we want to go, we human beings, right? What are we tuned in for, right? What do we, or if you speak in more religious language, what are we created towards? And it's a very difficult question, but I think, or at least I hope that I have shown to you to some extent that if you speak about leadership, this is a question which needs to come on the table. Because if you're going to lead people, it always will be a question for yourself and also the other people, is where are you leading me to, right? Towards what are you leading me? And then you have there unique for all. And I do not want to problematize it right now, but we might speak about it a little bit more in our discussion at the end of this lecture. What I hear very often nowadays from pupils is, well, the goal of my life is unique. It's different for me than from all other people. And all other people have all their unique goals in life. And that is a very interesting thought. And it's good, I think, also to speak about it, to discuss it, to have a philosophical dialogue about it. I'll tell you something, if it's really true, if it's really, really quite unique for all of us, then our thoughts about leadership will be heavily affected. Because everybody has a unique goal. then everybody needs to have his own leader or needs to be his own leader. Or if you're going to lead people, you can never lead a group because every person in that group will have a unique goal. And I mean, if you are in a train with 12 people and they all want to go to a different place, then you are in a bit of a problem because, I mean, yeah, the train can only go to one place, right? Okay, I hope to have made clear to you that when we speak about leadership, we speak about three ingredients. We speak about the one who's led, about the leader, and about the goal towards which. So whenever in the future or now you're in a situation where you are leading, I hope that this scheme, this outline may be helpful to your thinking about this matters. Great. Which brings me to the two examples, to the two persons which I want to introduce and speak about today. And they are Socrates and Paul. But before I go to them, I mean, I was just speaking with Joe, and I asked him, do you know a good leader? And I didn't ask him, could you please tell me the 10 characteristics of a good leader, let's say abstractly or something like this. And that is because my experience is that when you want to think about something, when you want to know about something, then always a good place to start is just to look at an example, right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at two examples, and not because they are perfect leaders, but just because, I mean, these two persons, they represent, in my view, certain things which I see around me, where I say, well, I mean, this is something which is an example of good leadership. Socrates. Who was he? Why was he a leader? And his style of leadership. A very special guy, I should say. Socrates lived in ancient Greece, in ancient Athens, to be precise, in the 5th century BC. So that's about 2,500 years ago. That was a bit of a unique, or at least a rare circumstance or situation in the history of mankind, because we have there also the first democracy, right? So we have there first situation where the people of Athens, not everybody, but let's say a large share of them, they were in command of their own lives. So they were in a situation which throughout history, not many people have been, where in a sense they had an opportunity or a possibility to lead themselves. And this is also what the city did, right? So the city led itself. It was not led by some king who ruled maybe in the name of some god or in the name of himself or in the name of his family tradition, but it was just Athens and the people of Athens who ruled themselves. And this, went along with all kind of social and political consequences, which we cannot go into now, but you can imagine it was a turbulent time. Such an experience and such a unique experiment in history will never just go unnoticed or will never just go smoothly. So there we were in Athens, and Athens was a very successful city from one perspective. So they were successful in their military endeavors. They were also successful in their artistic endeavors. So they built the Parthenon, for example, in this age. They also had some great sculptures and painters, and they also had great philosophers. One of them was Socrates, and he was, you'd say, a strange fellow, but also an impressive fellow. He was strange because, I mean, he didn't. Yeah, what did he do during the day? He would just walk around town, sit down in a square, and talk with people. He would go bare feet, so he didn't wear shoes or sandals. His clothes were generally a bit worn out, and he had a job. He didn't work it very often. Probably had just enough money to spend most of his time just walking around, as I say. And then you might compare it if you would be walking today through a big city. Imagine you would see one of these people who are a beggar on the street, but then there's a slight difference, because and I think that most people, when they walk on the street and they see a beggar, I mean, of course, ideally we should right, open our hearts maybe, and maybe even give some alms. But I think naturally also we could have a reaction of rather not come too close to somebody like that, or somebody who is thus worn very, clothed very worn out. And this is a reaction which Socrates also inspired in, let's say, um, by the political leaders of his city and many people. They said, well, Socrates, no, I rather not go too close to him because he's a queer fellow, a strange fellow, and I don't know what he's doing all day. He's wasting his time. But then there was a strange thing because especially young people, so between the age of, I would say about 14 years old and maybe about something like 25 years old, people who were, let's say, in the period of their lives in which they start to form their character, form their ideas and everything, they were drawn towards Socrates with a very strong attraction. So imagine you're a dad or a mom, you're about 50 years old, you have your son or your daughter, and right, you vision maybe a beautiful political career for your son in the maybe in the military, and then you see he's 18 years old and he is spending all his days speaking to a guy in a square, and they're just philosophizing, right? So what's going on here? In fact, this this older generation of people, they started to feel a bit threatened by Socrates, and they start to get annoyed with him a little bit. Because typically, what Socrates would do is he would ask questions about, all right, so okay, so you are a military leader, so you should know a lot about courage, right? Yeah, I know a lot about courage. All right, so tell me a little bit, what is courage? Well, courage, for example, myself, I am courageous, or my friends are, all right, so you give me an example. Speaking about what is courage. Now, in the course of the conversation, Socrates would really be almost like proving or showing or right people that really they didn't have such a clear command of the ideas which they spoke about in their daily lives. Same with politicians, right? So somebody would be say a minister there in ancient Greek and would be right drawing all the attention towards himself and right really asking for recognition of his great performance and of his great achievements. And then Socrates would come along and would say, all right, tell me, so what is really your achievement, right? And why is it such a great thing? And then people would run into trouble, and they would get annoyed with Socrates. I will tell you, I will not speak very long about it, but his life ended therefore a bit tragically. Because what happened when he was 70 years old, he was so they filed a lawsuit against him, his enemies, and they said, Socrates, we should persecute him, we should put him in jail, or we should even have him executed for two reasons. Well, first, he is corrupting the youth, right? So he's speaking with our young people, and he's just speaking with them about philosophy, and he's wasting their time, and he's wasting his own time. And my son or my daughter is speaking about nothing else but about philosophical ideas, and I cannot see what it's good for. And Socrates is cause of all this, so let's bring him to justice. Let's put him in jail. And then the other reason why they went after him was because allegedly he didn't believe in the city gods. And I think that's not exactly what was going on, but just Socrates was brave enough, and also you might say open-minded enough, to ask questions, even about the gods, even about the more, let's say, fundamental convictions of the Athenian society. People thought that was, people experienced that as threatening, and therefore there were a few people who said, well, let's go after him. And in fact, they managed. So Socrates was convicted, and then he was put to death. He was executed. He had to drink the hemlock. It's called in English. So it's a poisonous drink. So he died. And you might say, well, so it is his life. He spent his days speaking with people, and then he was killed. He died. And what's the value of his life? Well, he was a leader, and he was a leader during his life, and he was a leader also beyond his life, after his life. And why? Well, I mean, we spoke about it just now, right? So leadership, it also always goes with three ingredients. Somebody who wants to be led or needs to be led, there is a leader and there's a goal towards which. I already told you that Socrates had a particular attraction towards young people, and they went to him not just for fun, not just to be around him, but they went to him because they had an intuition that being with Socrates helps you really to find the goal of your life, really to learn how to get there, really also to be inspired with the strength to make of your life an adventure, to make of your life a success. So we see there definitely the first ingredient. See, people want to be led by, wanted to be led by Socrates. The fact that we're speaking about him today shows that he was not forgotten. He was not forgotten. So throughout history, people have always returned to the figure of Socrates to find this particular type of leadership which he represents. That's also thanks to one of his more famous pupils. His name is Plato. And Plato wrote a number of books, and all of Plato's books are really conversations, dialogues, and in almost all of them, Socrates is the main interlocutor, so the main personage. So Plato was so inspired by the leadership of Socrates that he decided that the leadership of Socrates is something which should be, let's say, bequeathed, which should be retained for the rest of posterity. And that's why he wrote these dialogues, and that's why we today still are able to experience a little bit the leadership of Socrates. And then, so we have the one who is led, we have Socrates, who was a leader, particular type of leader, and then we have the goal towards which. I have here on the blackboard now Socrates, who he was. I told a little bit about him. Why he was a leader? Well, I mean, I show you, right? We still speak about it today. He inspired many people. Style of leadership. We speak about that now because that's a very particular thing about Socrates. And let's see if I can. Yeah. I have here a few things on the blackboard which I'll read out, and then I'll use this text which is here on the blackboard to explain to you a little bit more about style of leadership of Socrates. Socrates leads by rationality, by inspiring critical thinking, by awakening our common sense reasoning. Also, I've tried to formulate his advice to leaders across the board, across the ages, across the world. His advice to leaders be: ask a question before you give an answer. Ask a question before you give an answer. I also put here on the blackboard his weakness, which I had to speak a little bit about also. His weakness is: what if we do not need a question, but really need an answer? All right, let me explain a bit more what I mean with these three things. Socrates, you might almost say he was the discoverer of the power of rationality, of the great wealth, the great richness of human reasoning. I think generally in our historical consciousness, we have kind of a sense that in the past, people used to think less than they do now. Whether this is exactly true, I do not want to go into right now, but we have a certain sense of enlightenment, right? Even there is a period in history, in modern history, which we call the Enlightenment. And generally it is about this, right? We say during the Enlightenment, the power of reason was discovered, or it was rediscovered. And we found that, right, all human beings, by their nature, have the ability to think, to reason, to argue, to ponder, to discover. And this is a source of a lot of answers. It's a source of a lot of inspiration for all of us. Only it does not always happen that this source is actually, let's say, accessed. that this treasure chest is really opened. Why? Because it can indeed happen that a whole people or an individual person, well, just goes with the flow, and during his whole life never really starts to question or to put doubt the convictions which he was taught when he was young, and then he lives happily, and then after a happy life he dies, but never really was he, let's say, challenged to you might say to access or to develop this ability which he had there inside him. So this helps as an introduction to understand the style of leadership of Socrates. Socrates is a man, when you meet him, he will not say many things, but he will ask questions. And why does he do it? Because he knows that every human being there inside him has a source of answers which only needs to be triggered. Right? Just now I was speaking with Joe, a little bit of a conversation. I think if we would speak for half an hour and nothing else would happen but me just saying more things and putting more of my theories into Joe's head, I think after about half an hour, all of you would have an intuition. What is this guy doing, right? Why is he never asking a question? So probably Joe, especially when we speak about his own life, will have all kinds of things to say and all kinds of things to think about the situation, about his own ideas about this thing. So the style of leadership of Socrates said he will ask a question, but he will not just ask any question, but he will ask exactly the question which kind of opens up your mind towards ideas that lie hidden in your mind, in your reason, in your memory. And that, I think, is a beautiful style of leadership. And that is the example which Socrates gave us, which I also want to encourage you to maybe to think about, or maybe even to experiment with, or maybe just to look around and see, well, what examples do I see in my own life of these people who are good at this? It's the art of asking a question, the art of asking the right question. I have a few friends around me or colleagues, and what we are used to doing is to say, well, I mean, when you are sitting in with a class of mine, or when I'm sitting in with a class of yours, please give me feedback afterwards, right? Tell me, was I asking the right questions or was I not? Because these kind of things, they do not come with just understanding the difference. They come with a lot of practice, with a lot of say just getting used to these kind of things. And this I say because I want to encourage you, first of all, because I want to encourage you, right, to take this on together, and also because I want to encourage you to be patient with yourself, because I mean all these things, they will come only slowly if you just persevere in the desire to become a better leader, become a better asker of questions. So just be patient with ourselves and with others, and then hopefully we indeed we improve little by little in these things. There you go. Socrates leads by rationality. This is what I want us to take away. And his advice to leaders is ask a question before you give an answer. Great. We're looking at leadership. We've said that leadership has three ingredients: leader, the one who is led, and the goal towards which. We've looked at an example, which is Socrates, an ancient Greek philosopher. And now we're going to look at Paul, or Saint Paul, or Paul of Tarsus. We have Socrates who leads by rationality, with Paul who leads by faith and hope. I was thinking of a bit of a metaphor, or a bit of a to understand the difference between the two of them. Socrates, when he is thinking of anything, when he is before a challenge, before a question, he will look inside. And when he leads people and people come to him with questions, he will point them inside. So he will point them towards their inner source of answers. St. Paul, on the other hand, when he is presented with any question, he himself will look up towards the supernatural, towards God. When people would come to him with questions, challenges. He would point them upwards also. So a bit about St. Paul. Who was he? What was his life? I already told you he was a Jew, so he belonged to the Jewish people. He was a deeply religious man, deeply religious. From childhood on, he was deeply committed to his religion, to the practices of his religion. Some of you might know, maybe not all of you, but the Jewish religion, it goes with all kind of different commandments, some of them very general, but some of them very specific also about your daily life. So what you can eat and what you cannot eat, what you can say, what you cannot say, how you praise God, how you not praise God. And Paul was deeply committed to all these commandments, all these customs of his people. He was deeply obedient also. Obedience is a very important theme in the life of St. Paul. And when you look at the word obedient, you can do the same kind of thing as which we did before with the word leadership. Obedience also has this kind of this kind of ingredients. Paul was obedient. He was obedient towards somebody, because you can never be obedient just like that. He was obedient to God and to the representatives of God, which were the leaders of his Jewish religious community. And it meant that when any question was on the table, not necessarily that he wouldn't think about it, but if he would think something else than his leaders, or if he would think something else than his God, then he would subject his own thoughts, and he would finally, let's say, obey. He would finally be obedient towards the inspirations which he received from above, rather than forcing, or rather than, going after his own ideas. So he was obedient. And he lived in a tumultuous time, as did Socrates. St. Paul lived in the first half of the first century AD. He lived in the Near East. As I said, he was born in a town in south of modern day Turkey, and then he moved to Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, he lived. He was taught. He became a master, a rabbi. He became learned in his religion, the Jewish religion. And the Jewish people was already very old, so they had been around for hundreds of years, thousands of years. And as some of you probably know, that the Jewish people were, and in fact still are, were waiting for a person to come from their people and who would lead them to victory. They were waiting for an anointed king who was prophesied to them in several generations. So they were waiting for somebody whom you might say God promised them to lead them out of all of their troubles. They're waiting for an anointed king. So was Paul, so were the people of his day and age, and they were waiting for it in, let's say, there was a very strong sense of expectation. I said they were waiting for an anointed king, and to anoint, this is a word which maybe you're not familiar with. It refers to a very, let's say, simple ritual where oil is put on the head or the forehead of a person, and that is a way to mark him off as somehow different, somehow unique. And the Hebrew word for anointed, or the anointed one, is Messiah. And that's why, and this is a word which you're familiar with, you can also say the Jews were waiting for the Messiah. They were waiting for their anointed king, for their Messiah. And in fact, the Greek word for Messiah is Christos, hence our word Christ and Christians. So they were waiting for the anointed king. In Hebrew, they were waiting for the Messiah. In Greek, they were waiting for the Christ. Now, during the life of Paul, in fact, there were several people who claimed or who were thought maybe to be this expected and this prophesied king. One of them was, of course, this Jesus of Nazareth, who was a carpenter from Nazareth, and he started to preach, and he seemed to be suggesting that he was this Messiah. But Paul and his friends, Paul and his fellow religious leaders there in Jerusalem, were not convinced that Jesus was the Messiah. In fact, they were quite sure that he was just another rebel, or maybe not a rebel, but at least a peaceful lunatic who was convinced that he was going to save the world, but who was not really the Messiah. And in fact, to say that you are the Messiah when you are not is, of course, a great blasphemy, because you are almost saying that you are God, or at least that you are very close to God. And if you are not, then this, you can imagine, is a blasphemy, which means that it's really an insult to the religion. That's why Paul and his friends were initially very hostile towards this figure of Jesus of Nazareth. And they became more hostile towards him as he started to draw more followers towards him. And especially during the last few years of the life of Jesus, he had a great following among many Jewish people. And from the perspective of Paul, this was a terrible thing, because people were being led astray. People were being led away from the true religion, from the true God, by this Jesus. And this was why initially Paul and his friends, they were glad, you might say, that with Jesus the same happened as with Socrates, which is he was executed. He was nailed to the cross by the Romans as a rebel against Roman authority. So Paul and his friends, they were glad that now they could draw all these people back to the true Jewish religion. But this did not happen, because after Jesus died on the cross, some of his more close disciples, some of his more close followers, they came back and they started to preach the news that Jesus had risen from the dead. And in fact, very soon there were several people who testified of this rising from the dead of Jesus. And from that moment on, they drew even more followers than before. So if you imagine that maybe during the life of Jesus, maybe several thousand people would be following him and be walking in his footsteps, after he died and allegedly rose from the dead, this is the fundamental belief of the Christian faith, that Christ rose from the dead. But of course, in this day and age, just after this happened, it was an allegation of his followers, but it was not all yet clear whether this was actually the case. But after he died and he rose from the dead, and his pupils started to preach this news, they got an even greater following. So there Paul was again, and he again said, well, this is a very bad thing. And he started, together with his fellow Jews and his fellow leaders of the Jewish people, to persecute these new Christians. And why did he do it? Well, for the same reason as he did everything, as I already told you. He was convinced that God wanted this from him. He was convinced that the supernatural, the above, that towards which he always looked when he was looking for the answers of what to do, was asking of him to persecute this new and erroneous this new erroneous religion, this new erroneous conviction, which was gathering around the figure of Jesus Christ. And you can see here a little bit of, let's say, the beginning of the leadership of Paul, because in this persecution of the Christians, he was really a leader. And you see that at the beginning also of the difference between Socrates and Paul, because where Socrates would of course be asking questions, right? Like, why would you believe that Jesus was risen from the dead, or what should we do about all these kind of things? Paul, rather, he looked up and was convinced that God asked of him to do something against this, and with this strong conviction also inspired others and started to lead others in this persecution. So there was a great persecution going on in Jerusalem and also beyond Jerusalem. But something happened. Something funny happened. Well, funny, impressive, remarkable. In fact, historical. Because one day he was on his way from Jerusalem to Damascus, which is until this day the capital of Syria. And he was going to Damascus, in fact, because he was there to persecute the neo-Christian community of Damascus. But on his way to Damascus, when he was already there, you can picture yourself there, but maybe a desert kind of landscape. He is with some of his followers. He is sitting on his horse, and he is thrown off his horse all of a sudden. But not by somebody, but just he is thrown off his horse. He lies there, and he hears a voice. And the voice speaks to him, Paul, Paul, why do you persecute me? This was what you may call, on all accounts, a religious experience, right? Religious sensation. It was clear that it was not a person who was screaming to him from a distance. It was also clear to him that it was not the voice of his own reasoning, because he was not thinking about these things. He was going to Damascus very convinced of his project and of his goal. So when he fell off his horse and when he heard this voice saying, Paul, Paul, why do you persecute me? For him, it was clear, really at a moment's notice, that it was God who was speaking to him. And he said, God asks me, Paul, Paul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, well, who am I persecuting? Well, I am persecuting the Christians. I am persecuting Christ. So if this voice says to me, why are you persecuting me? Then apparently God and Jesus Christ must be the same, because he is the one who I am persecuting, but he is also who is now speaking to me with the voice of God. So this was a watershed moment in the life of Paul, because all of a sudden he was convinced, let's say unto the deepest region of his soul, of his life, that God did not anymore want of him to persecute the Christians, but rather to become a Christian himself and to become a great leader of this new Christian religion. So his life changed greatly, except from a certain perspective, you might say nothing changed in his life, because Paul remained fundamentally always the same, namely the one who always looks up, always looks towards God to find the direction, the goal, the meaning, the answers of his life. He did it before his conversion and he did it after his conversion. The only thing is that first he was quite convinced that God asked one thing of him, and then he was absolutely convinced that God asked another thing of him, namely, as I said, become a Christian and to become a great leader of the Christian church. And this he did become. He spent a few years after his conversion in rather more secluded life, to probably just ponder or to meditate on what had happened to him. But then afterwards, he started a mission, he started a project which would change the face of the world, and especially of Europe, which we are now, and you are studying European studies, I think many of you. And I am able to tell you, and this I can say with very little doubt historically, that St. Paul changed the history of Europe. He started to spread the new Christian religion beyond the borders of the Jewish territory. So in the very beginning of Christian history, it was not very clear what kind of a thing this would become. And many people expected that this would be just a different kind of Jewish religion, and it would always remain small, and it would always remain, let's say, also geographically very contracted. But Paul was the one who intuited, who also received this mission from God to say, no, this Christian religion is something which is meant for everybody. So it is meant to be spread around the world. And Paul said, you know what? If this is what God wants, then I will not ask any further questions, except maybe apart from a few practical questions, but I will just go for it. So he went. First, he went through the Near East. Then, at one point, he was in what is currently northwestern Turkey, and he received a dream. And there again, you have a dream, and there you have Paul, who receives certain, let's say, information or a certain demand or a question from above, and he answers the call. And the dream was that he should cross into Europe, and he did cross into Europe. And everywhere he went, he would found new Christian communities. So he founded a few of them in modern day Greece, in the modern day Balkan countries. He founded a Christian community in Rome also, which is there until this very day, as are the others. So he went around the world, and he inspired many people to change their lives, to believe the gospel story that Jesus was risen from the dead, and to start to live their lives as good Christians do. And it could not be more different from the style of Socrates, because Paul would ask very few questions. In fact, he would not ask any question. He once did, and you know when he did that? He did it when he was in Athens, and that's an interesting history. I will not tell the whole story now, but when he was in Athens, the city of Socrates, he probably just realized that if I want to do something here in this philosophical town, I cannot just go with my normal style. I also need to adapt a little bit to their style, and he started to ask questions. But it's an interesting story. If you want, you can read about it, but I will not go into it more right now. But as I said, this is what I wanted to stress: is Paul was not the one asking questions, but he was the one giving answers. He was inspiring people with the inspirations he had received from God, and he was also inspiring them to look up themselves and to discover the will of God, and then to follow the will of God. So that is St. Paul, and that is why he is a leader, because, so he has, during his lifetime, inspired many people and led many people towards a Christian life, a Christian style of life. And he is also a leader, like Socrates, after his death. He died. He died also. This is an aspect of this lecture today, that all the people we are speaking about, they die in a rather gruesome way, because we had Socrates, we had Jesus Christ just now, and Paul also died a martyr, which means he was executed and he was crucified. But after his death, his voice and his texts continued to inspire people to lead Christian lives, to give their lives to the service of others, to love others, and this is why he is a leader. Then we have Paul, who he is. We have spoken about him, why he is a leader, why he inspired many people during his life, and afterwards the style of leadership. Now I go to the right column to have a bit of a summary of this, I guess. Yeah. Paul leads by faith and hope, by referring to a higher authority, by reminding the people who he is leading of a divine goal. That tries to sum it up. Then, his advice to leaders: be led by a higher principle before you lead others. The leadership of Paul is impossible without a higher principle, a supernatural principle, you might say, a divine principle, you might say, or God, you might say. Of course, if you do not believe in this higher principle, or if you believe it but you have no connection with it whatsoever, you are not going to inspire anybody else to follow it. And that's why, if you look at the leaderships, the style of leadership of Paul, and if you also look at the success of the leadership of Paul, I think you have to summarize it. You would see that really the essence of it is this: he himself was a deeply religious and obedient man. He lived with God. God was his every day, was his every thought, was his whole soul. And from this relationship which he had to God, he was able to inspire other people also to be led by this higher principle. So that was his leadership. And it's interesting that there is one, let's say, there's a commonality between Socrates and Paul, and that is that really neither of them are pointing towards themselves. And I think this is which also could be a nice takeaway. So I think a good leader never points towards himself. Socrates is a leader who points really to the inside, to the rationality, to our capacity to find answers ourselves. So he points to something else. Paul also points to something else. Paul points towards a source of hope, source of faith, towards supernatural and above a principle which people can tune in with, which people can meet, which people can encounter, and which can help them to find their goal, to reach their goal, to find the strength also to get there. And that is Paul. And then also Paul, of course, he has also for Paul there is let's say a risk, and that is his weakness or his weak point, or let's say the point which you should pay attention to. What if the others have lost touch with the higher principle you still believe in? I mean, I would have to speak with all of you personally, and I would love to do it, but we cannot do it now. But of course, if you start to think a bit more about this type of leadership of Paul, then of course it will obviously draw you will obviously be drawn into the question: what do I believe in? Right? What are the, let's say, the greater, higher principles of my life? And then if you want to lead people on the basis of that, then I mean, you can understand that this is something which you need to have in the back of your mind. Paul, right, he had a keen awareness that he could only be a leader to those who shared his faith. And that is why also his attitude was quite different to those who shared his faith, who were willing and able to look towards the same God than towards others. So the advice to leaders is be led by a higher principle before you lead others, which is really the point which Tarsus also just made. And his weakness is be careful that you can only lead like this if others are also in touch with the same principle. So it's not about you. All right. We've looked at leadership. We've seen that leadership has three ingredients: the leader, the one who is led, and the goal towards which. We've looked at two examples of leaders, Socrates and St. Paul. Socrates has been a leader, he still is a leader, and he is a leader on the basis of rationality. So he will ask questions, helping people to get in touch with, to be led by, to be inspired, this inner source of answers, this inner source of direction, which is human rationality. And then we have looked at St. Paul, who is also a leader, has been for many years, and who leads by faith and hope, who leads people by pointing them towards this higher source of answers, of direction, which is God, which is the supernatural, which is the higher. And that is, let's say, the substance of my lecture. And I'll close off now with showing here on the blackboard the assignment. Here is the assignment. I'll just read it out loud and then we'll close off with that. Assignment. Think a while and come up with your favorite leader. It may be someone you know personally, someone you've read about, but also a fictional character from a book or a movie. Write an essay introducing your favorite leader and elaborating one or two aspects of his or her leadership. You may refer to the different aspects of leadership as represented by Socrates or St. Paul, but you may also choose a different reference frame to analyze your leader. You can use between 500 and 750 words. Deadline will be the 14th of February, 2200 hours, and you can mail it to Margriet, which is here is her email address, but you probably already have you know it already. And that's it. Thanks again, and hope to meet you later. Good day.